It was supposed to be just another day. A woman, sharp-minded and confident, walked out of a coffee shop, ready to take on her next case. But the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk, everything changed. A police officer, standing near his patrol car, locked eyes with her. His stare wasn't just one of authority, it carried something else. Something darker. Without warning, he blocked her path. His tone was harsh, dismissive. "Move along," he muttered, as if she didn't belong there. Confused, she stood her ground. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. That's when his attitude shifted from passive aggression to open hostility. Before she knew it, he shoved her back, hard. The force sent her stumbling, shock flashing across her face. But what the officer didn't know, what he didn't expect, was who she was. She wasn't just any woman. She was a lawyer, and she knew the law better than he did. As the tension escalated, people around them stopped to watch. The officer thought he had power, but he was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. Because this time, he messed with the wrong person. The crowd around them grew, murmurs spreading as people pulled out their phones. The officer's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not in public. "I said move along," he repeated, stepping closer, his hand hovering near his belt. But the woman didn't flinch. She had spent years in courtrooms, standing up to powerful people who thought they could bully their way through life. She wasn't about to back down now. "Officer, you just assaulted me," she said, her voice steady. "I need your badge number." His eyes flickered with something, panic, maybe just for a second, before his expression hardened. "You people always think you know everything," he muttered under his breath. But she heard it, and so did the people recording. She took a slow breath, choosing her next words carefully. "I'm a lawyer, and I know my rights." The moment she said it, the energy shifted. A few people in the crowd whispered, some even nodding in recognition. She was no stranger to high-profile cases. The officer had no idea who he had just put his hands on. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. His next move would change everything. The officer's face darkened. The moment she said she was a lawyer, something in him snapped. Maybe it was anger, maybe fear. Either way, he wasn't about to let her take control of the situation. He stepped forward, his voice dropping lower. "I don't care who you are," he said. "You're causing a disturbance." A few people in the crowd scoffed. They had seen the whole thing. She wasn't the one causing trouble. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't resisted. She had only asked for his badge number, something she had every right to do. And yet he acted like she was the problem. The woman, still standing tall, pulled out her phone. "I'd like to report an officer," she said, dialing. The cop's eyes flickered with hesitation. He knew what that call could mean for him. But instead of backing off, he made his next move. He reached for her wrist. Not aggressively, not enough to make it obvious, just enough to try and control the situation. But she wasn't having it. She pulled her arm back before he could get a grip. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice sharp now. The tension between them was thick, the crowd waiting to see what would happen next. The air around them felt electric. More people had gathered now, phones held high, recording every second. The officer's jaw tightened as he realized he was losing control of the situation. He had expected her to back down, to walk away like so many others had before, but she wasn't like the others. She stood her ground, her phone still in hand, her expression unshaken. "I told you not to touch me," she repeated, her voice carrying through the street. "And now I'm filing a report." The officer exhaled sharply, glancing around. He could feel the weight of the stares, the quiet judgment in the eyes of the crowd. He wasn't used to being on the other side of the law, and it was clear he didn't like it. His hand hovered near his radio. Maybe he was considering calling for backup. Maybe he was deciding his next move. Then in a split second, he made a choice. He stepped forward again, this time with more force. The lawyer took a step back, but she wasn't running. Instead, she lifted her phone higher, making sure every word, every movement was recorded. The crowd was silent now, waiting. The officer's face burned with frustration. He had the power of the badge, but she had the power of the law. And in this moment, neither one was willing to back down. Then, just when it seemed like the tension couldn't get any thicker, a voice cut through the silence. "Excuse me, officer. Is there a problem here?" The officer turned sharply, his frustration momentarily shifting to confusion. A man in a dark suit stepped forward from the crowd. He looked calm, composed, but there was something in his tone, something sharp. The lawyer's eyes widened slightly as she recognized him. He wasn't just any bystander. He was a senior attorney at one of the most powerful law firms in the city. And more importantly, he was her mentor. The officer hesitated, his grip tightening near his belt. He had already lost control of the situation. And now, with another lawyer stepping in, things were slipping even further. "This woman was interfering with law enforcement," he said quickly, trying to regain authority. But the man didn't flinch. "I saw everything," the attorney replied. "And from where I'm standing, the only one interfering is you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The officer's face burned red. He was outnumbered, not just by the bystanders, but now by people who knew the law inside and out. And yet, instead of backing down, he did something no one expected. He reached for his radio, muttering something into it. Within seconds, another patrol car pulled up. The lawyer's heart pounded. This wasn't over. It was only getting started. The second patrol car came to a stop, its doors swinging open. Two officers stepped out, scanning the scene. The crowd was still, waiting to see what would happen next. The first officer straightened his stance, as if their arrival somehow put him back in control. "This woman is refusing to comply," he announced. But before he could say anything else, the senior attorney took a step forward. "That's not what happened," he said firmly. "And you should know, officer, everything is being recorded." One of the newly arrived officers glanced at the crowd, at the phones pointed in their direction. Then he turned to the lawyer. "Ma'am, would you like to file a complaint?" The first officer's expression shifted. He hadn't expected that. His authority had been slipping, but now it was completely crumbling. He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but before he could, the lawyer spoke up. "Yes, I would," she said, locking eyes with him. "I'll also be filing a civil rights lawsuit." A hush fell over the crowd. The officer's face turned pale. He had started this thinking he held all the power. But now, in front of everyone, he realized the truth. He had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The officer swallowed hard, his confidence completely gone. He looked around, but there was nowhere to turn. The people watching weren't on his side. His fellow officers weren't rushing to defend him. And the woman standing before him, the one he had underestimated, wasn't backing down. One of the newly arrived officers took out a notepad. "We'll need your statement," he told the lawyer, "and we'll be reviewing the footage." She nodded, taking a steady breath. The moment felt bigger than just her. It wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about accountability, about standing up when things weren't right. The first officer stepped back, silent now. He knew there was nothing he could say to fix this. His actions were caught on camera, his words recorded. And now he would have to answer for them. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the lawyer turned to her mentor. "Thank you," she said. He smiled. "You didn't need me." You had it handled. She looked back at the scene one last time before walking away, knowing one thing for sure. No matter how much power someone thinks they have, the truth will always come to light.